Justice at Gate 14. The story of Olivia Bennet. The airport hummed with its usual energy, rolling suitcases clicking against polished tiles, muffled announcements echoing over speakers, and the quiet hum of conversation as travelers prepared to embark on their journeys. Gate 14 was no different, alive with the anticipation that often lingers before a flight. Flight 739 to Aspen was preparing for final boarding, and among the passengers stood Olivia Bennet. Olivia moved with a quiet, effortless grace. Her tall, elegant frame was wrapped in a perfectly tailored navy suit that spoke of understated wealth and refinement. A silk scarf, a gift from her husband Michael, was tied neatly around her neck, adding a splash of warmth to her ensemble. Olivia's polished leather handbag swayed lightly against her side as she approached the gate agent. Her expression was composed, her stride purposeful. To any observer, Olivia exuded confidence. There was no hesitation in the way she carried herself. "Good afternoon," Olivia said with a polite smile, offering her boarding pass to the gate agent. The young man behind the counter hesitated as he took the ticket. His gaze flickered briefly to the pilot standing nearby, Captain Jonathan Blake. Blake, a tall man with an arrogant air, leaned casually against the counter, watching the exchange with faint disinterest until Olivia caught his attention. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and a smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. The gate agent, after scanning Olivia's ticket, started to gesture her forward when Blake stepped in. "Excuse me," Captain Blake said, his voice smooth but tinged with condescension. "Ma'am, are you sure you're at the right gate?" Olivia turned toward him, her dark eyes unwavering. "Quite sure," she replied, her tone calm and measured. Blake chuckled lightly, the sound sharp and grating. "It's just unusual," he continued. "We don't often see first-class passengers like—" He stopped short, but the implication hung heavy in the air. The gate agent shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension. Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. She had heard this before, too many times, and it always stung, no matter how composed she tried to remain. "Is there an issue with my ticket?" she asked, her voice cool. Blake didn't miss a beat. "I'd just like to verify a few things before you board," he said, his smug expression betraying something darker, a confidence in his own authority. Olivia tilted her head slightly, refusing to shrink under the weight of his scrutiny. "You're the pilot," she pointed out. "Are ticket checks part of your duties now?" Blake's smirk widened. "I like to ensure everything runs smoothly on my flights. Protocol, you know." The crowd around the gate began to take notice. Murmurs rose as passengers exchanged glances. Their curiosity piqued. Some looked uncomfortable, others intrigued, but no one spoke up. Olivia could feel their eyes on her, the silent judgment hanging thick in the air. Yet she refused to let it break her composure. "If there's a problem," she said firmly, "I'd like to know what it is. Otherwise, I'd appreciate being allowed to board." Blake's expression faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Security concerns," he said vaguely. "We've had some incidents lately. You understand." Olivia knew exactly what he meant and what he didn't have the courage to say outright. She exhaled slowly, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I'll contact my husband," she said simply, reaching for her phone. Blake laughed, the sound dripping with mockery. "Oh, by all means," he said, "but no phone call is going to change the rules." Ignoring him, Olivia dialed. "Michael," she said calmly when the line picked up, "I need you at gate 14. Now." Blake's smirk widened further, his arrogance unchecked. "No one's coming to save you," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Olivia slid her phone back into her bag and stepped aside. "I'll wait," she said simply, her posture unbroken. The crowd's curiosity swelled as minutes ticked by. The tension around gate 14 was palpable. Passengers whispered behind cupped hands, sneaking glances at Olivia, then at Captain Blake. Olivia stood firm, unmoving, her quiet defiance both graceful and resolute. Michael Bennet arrived with the precision of a thunderclap. The air seemed to shift as he strode purposefully through the terminal, parting the gathered crowd like a knife through water. Tall and commanding in a sharply tailored suit, Michael exuded an authority that turned heads. People didn't need to know who he was to understand that he was someone. His dark eyes found Olivia instantly. She stood tall and poised, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the subtle tightness in her jaw. It was enough to make his blood simmer. "Michael," Olivia said softly as he approached, her relief evident though her voice remained steady. Michael turned his attention to Captain Blake, who was still leaning against the counter with a smug expression. "I'd like an explanation," Michael said, his voice low and even but carrying a weight that silenced the room. "Why is my wife being prevented from boarding?" Blake pushed away from the counter, squaring his shoulders as though preparing for a confrontation. "I'm ensuring the safety of my passengers," he said smoothly. "Your wife raised some concerns." Michael's brow furrowed. "Concerns?" he repeated, his voice sharp. "She presented a valid ticket, didn't she?" "Well, yes," Blake admitted reluctantly. "But I have the authority to make decisions regarding passenger safety." Michael stepped closer, his towering presence swallowing the remaining space between them. "And what exactly about my wife makes her a safety concern?" Blake faltered. His earlier confidence was starting to crack, but he attempted to cover it with bravado. "I don't have to justify my decisions to you." "You do now," Michael said, his tone cutting like ice. The crowd held its breath. Blake straightened, his jaw tightening. "And who exactly do you think you are?" Michael's eyes didn't waver. "Michael Bennett," he said, his voice cold and measured. "Owner of this airline." The room fell silent. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the gate agent turned as pale as the ticket in his hand. Captain Blake's face drained of color, his mouth falling open in shock. Michael didn't let him speak. "Your actions today," he said, his voice rising just slightly, "haven't just humiliated my wife. They've jeopardized the integrity of this company. I demand an explanation. Now." Blake stammered, his arrogance evaporating. "I was just following protocol." "Do not insult my intelligence by hiding behind protocol," Michael shot back. "This was prejudice, plain and simple, and it ends here." Security officers, summoned quietly by gate staff, approached as Michael turned to them. "Escort him off this flight," Michael ordered. "Consider this his last day in uniform." Blake's protests grew louder as he was led away, his voice rising in desperation before fading into the distance. A scattering of applause broke out among the passengers, hesitant at first but growing stronger. Michael turned to Olivia, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" Olivia smiled faintly, her composure unbroken. "I am now." Michael turned back to the gate staff. "Ensure Mrs. Bennett is boarded first and treated with the courtesy she deserves." "Yes, sir. Right away," the gate agent stammered, scanning Olivia's boarding pass with trembling hands. As Olivia stepped onto the jet bridge, the weight of the incident still lingered, but she held her head high. This moment had shaken more than just one man's arrogance. It had sent ripples through the industry, and Olivia knew that change was coming. To be continued.